Alright, so time to start taking this carburetor off. Start by shutting off the fuel valve, and we're going to have to drain some more gas again. And we're also going to have to disconnect the linkage, and so we're going to want to take some notes on how we disconnect the linkage, make sure that we're able to restore things back to how they were. So we'll take the primer off. Alright, I got a few more tools here. We're going to take the carburetor off. Looking at the carburetor setup here, I need to make sure I make note of which hole in the throttle plate that the governor linkage is connected into, as well as I think I'm going to attempt to take the intake elbow off of the engine here versus try to unbolt the carburetor from the intake elbow. Either way, there's a gasket that I'm going to end up disturbing. However, I think it's going to be easier to get tools in and take this elbow off here than it is to get a screwdriver into the backside here and then potentially a wrench, because this is a through bolt with a screw and a nut. So I think this is being a number 3 Phillips. I think it's just going to be easier to use the Torx on this intake elbow here. Even though the muffler is partly in the way here, I'm hoping that the bolt isn't so long that it hits the backside of the flange on the muffler. I'm hoping that I can unscrew this just enough that I can get it out and shift it off to the side. I don't actually know yet, so we're about to find out. But I did figure out that these are T30s, and I have a long T30, and it's a bit of an angle, but I'm hoping that it's not too tight to the point where I can, there we go, yep, loosen it up with a slight angle. And you can see half of the bolt here, maybe not, is pretty black, and then that half is clean looking and then black. So we may end up taking the muffler off if we got a exhaust gasket issue. But for right now, I'm going to see if I can get this out without having to pull the muffler. Alright, so now that we got our carburetor off, I'm going to go separate it here as well, and then we'll have to dismantle it for cleaning. Alright, so here we are over at the workbench. I got the carb and a drain pan here, and so now we're going to go ahead and separate the carburetor from the intake elbow. Got a number 3 Phillips bit on a ratchet, and I'm going to grab a 7/16. This can be kind of hard to get a wrench on here, but I'm going to see if I can. Let's see if I can just break the nuts loose first versus having to use the screwdriver end, because these can sometimes be stuck on there pretty good. Because the last thing I want to do is strip out that screwdriver, that number 3 Phillips head, trying to get these loose, and then have trouble retightening them or servicing them in the future. So if I can break them free with the wrench, I like to do that. These ones are always difficult. When they're really tough like that, sometimes we got to go over to the bench vise. So here I've got a set of polyurethane vise jaws here, and I'm just going to gently kind of chuck that up in the vices to act as an extra hand so that I can get a better grip here. There we go. Okay. Kind of helps stabilize and hold everything in place. And then we pull these out here. Okay. The carburetor. And take elbow fasteners. I like to do my disassembly of the carburetors. Let's see here. Over the top of there, so that way if things were to fall out, they don't hit the workbench and then roll off and hit the floor. They stay in the drain pan. So when we disassemble this for cleaning, especially if we're going to use a strong cleaning solution, we need to make sure that we remove all the plastic and rubber seals and parts that won't survive these strong solvents. I don't plan to use any strong solvents, but we're still going to pull it apart anyways. Yeah, so that actually looks pretty clean and in good shape, so that's good. There is a brass washer and a rubber O-ring in here. We do want to make sure we get out before it goes in for its cleaning. We need to go back and get a pick for that, I suppose. Pull the seat out. Just trying to get up underneath this O-ring here and break its seal to the carb body. I try to take them off without stretching or pulling them so that they stay intact should the worst case happen and I need to try to reuse it. Usually these are pretty popular carburetor styles, so you can still get kits for these, but they are of the older variety. You know, a lot of the snowblowers don't, and engines in general don't have adjustable idle screws or main mixture screws, and haven't for quite some time, so it's a sign of quite how old this thing is. Got a pick to get that O-ring out. Trying to be careful I don't catch and damage that leading thread there. There's a little washer. We got to be careful we don't lose that, and we make sure we get that back in place. I don't know if you can see that black on black here. A little sealing washer, or I'm sorry, O-ring. If I knew the carb kit was here and I had welt plugs on hand, I'd pull those too, but oftentimes I try to get away without pulling those out to clean them at least the first round through. And I think I'm going to leave everything else intact. We're just going to send it through a quick bath in the cleaner to see what it comes out as and see how much further we got to take it. Alright, so now that we have our carburetor stripped down, I've got all the rubber parts that I care to take out of it right now, and I've got the idle screw out and the main jet out and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and put this, I got some carburetor cleaning solution here. I'm going to go ahead and put this in this old peanut butter jar here. Okay. Give it a little wiggle to work out some of the air bubbles, let it fully saturate everything. And then I'm going to gently put a lid on this. Then we're going to take it over to the ultrasonic cleaner. Let me move you for a better view. So here's our ultrasonic cleaner. And I've got it pre-filled with some water that's warming up. And I have it just high enough to submerge the carburetor. And then I'm going to set this for about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back and check on it. So once the first 5 minutes is up, I like to pull this out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the carburetor around so now that gravity is pulling on all the dirt in another direction, so that that way hopefully we get everything dislodged. So we'll just come in here. I'm just going to come in here. You can take a look at it's looking cleaner already. My cleaning solution is dirtier. And I'm going to flip the carburetor. We got to close the choke a little bit. Flip it over. Put it back in. And we're going to run it for another 5 minutes. Alright, so when our time is up, it's time to pull it out. Usually have a bit of a look at it. It's definitely cleaner than it was, but it could stand to use a little bit more time. But I'm going to go ahead and shake it out. We'll rinse it. And then we'll blow it out with some compressed air and see how we do and give it a closer look. Alright, so once it's rinsed, I like to take a long air nozzle at arm's length with safety glasses on. I'm going to start by blowing it dry a little bit and remove kind of the big water at like quarter throttle of the air gun. And get some of the big stuff out of the way so it doesn't spray back into my face, and then I'll come back and I'll blow out all the holes. Since I didn't take the spring off on the throttle return spring here, I need to be careful when I spray around there that I don't dislodge that spring. And now I'm coming back and I'm blowing out all the holes. Full throttle. Especially the air bleeds. Yeah, that air bleed would be a little bit easier to get to if I had taken out the choke, but this one right here I don't think was a problem. Part of what I'm doing here is I stuck my finger into the venturi so that I can hopefully feel the air come out the idle ports on the inside or the back side of the venturi by the throttle plate. So I got my finger in there and I'm hoping to feel the air pressure come out of those jets to verify that my idle ports are clear, which they feel like they are because my fingertip got cool when I did that. I could feel the air on it, and when I blow through here I can feel it come out the primer hose hook up here, and a very faint amount of pulsing from my atmospheric vent, which if you can see, since it's really clean, you see a little hole right there at the tip of my finger. That's that atmospheric vent, and we want to make sure that that's clear. It's such a tiny hole, it gets plugged up pretty easy. Alright, so the next thing will be to reassemble this and give it another try. Okay, so now that the carburetor has been cleaned and dried, it's time to get it reassembled. I'm not going to be overly concerned about some of the staining on the outside of the carburetor. I feel that the internal passageways are clean, and that's really what we need here. So we're going to go ahead and put it together. We're going to start with the fuel inlet needle seat. And so for that, we got that right here. The smooth side is going to face towards the needle, and then the side with the rib on it, there's like a small ridge if I can get the camera to focus. So to do that, we're going to take our Tecumseh carb tool here, this end, and we need to put it so that the ridge side, there you go, you can see the different contrasting colors. And then we're going to take and insert that into the carburetor. You got to push it all the way down till it fully seats, and then kind of spin it as you pull it out, so that way it leaves the seat fully seated down in the bottom of the bore there. And then now we can take the float. The needle's still on here. Note that the open end or the loose end of the clip for the needle, that has to point towards the choke side of the carburetor. So we do actually have to pay attention to that and make sure that we have that the right way as it goes down. And so I'm going to just set this down like that, and then I'm going to find the hinge pin. Trying to do this through the camera is interesting, I'll tell you. Line up the holes in the float with the hinge pin holes. Okay, then while I'm here, before I do my O-ring, I also want to take a moment and verify my float height, which is the space from what would be the top of the float to the bottom of the carburetor body. The flat spot machined into the center of the handle of this tool is what it should be. So let's see if I can get it held in a way that you can see that. Okay, this should be able to just slip through and skim the float. So my float height is actually a little bit on the low side, okay, because there shouldn't be that much of a gap there. So in order to adjust that, we have to bend a little tab with a screwdriver, proper bending tool. We got to push that little tab that the needle sits on towards the float, and we got to do this carefully without going too far, but without damaging the float. So let's put a little bit of pressure on it, and then I'll bring my gauge back over. Still got a bit of a gap, so I'm going to want to come back and bend that a little bit more. Now let's see if I can open it up so you guys can see this a little bit better. So put a little pressure on it to push it. I don't want to do it too much and overbend it. It wants to tip back because I'm tipping it so that you can see it on the camera. So I'm trying to gently hold it down with my thumb. We're pretty close. And what we should see when we look at it this way is it should be a little less than parallel usually. And I feel that's about where we are. So we're going to go ahead and proceed forward. So now that we got that on, take the O-ring. Gotta gently put that back on. Making sure to walk it around without stretching it. Making sure that there's no twists in it. Okay. And then the bowl. Recalling that this flat spot right here needs to be parallel to the float hinge. So when I go to put this on, I need to line those two up. Like so. Get that seated. Then next, this is my bowl nut slash main mixture adjustment. And I'm going to back this out once. We're going to just reset it back to the factory settings, but let me just show you what's all here. So we got a spring, and we have a threaded portion, and then we've got our tapered portion, which is actually what controls the amount of volume of fuel that can flow through the hole. Right here is a brass washer, and underneath that brass washer is a sealing O-ring to seal around the shiny part of the screw shaft there. And so this is going to go into here. We're going to thread this in till it bottoms out in the hole, and then we'll back it off 2 turns. While I had it apart and while we were doing the cleaning, made sure to blow through that hole so it's clear, but then we also had to clean out the hole for the idle port. Let me see if I can get it to focus on the idle port. There it is. It's a tiny little hole right there in that non-threaded portion. That is the tiny little hole that delivers fuel for the engine's for the carburetor's idle circuit. And so I took my carb cleaning tips here. These are they look like torch cleaning needles, but they're a little bit different, and they're different sizes, and just keep finding that you just keep going from the very skinny one to the next size up until you get one that barely fits. But we basically just went in here like this, kind of poked that out and ran that in and out until we had a nice clean looking hole, and then we blow it clean. Okay, so that's how we did that. And then now this will screw onto here. And these threads feel a lot better now than they did when it was coming apart. And snug as always should have to make it in order for it to seal up down here with the washer. It's very important to remember the washer. If you don't have one of those fiber washers here, it's either not going to clamp the bowl tight enough, or it's not going to seal well enough on the bottom of the bowl, and it won't seal. And then it doesn't take much to compress that O-ring, but we want to make sure that it hasn't pinched or rolled or cut that O-ring. Okay, so now we can keep moving on. We'll do the idle jet next. That's this one right here. Make sure the tip is clean and in good shape. Okay, and then we have a brass washer that goes on. And then there's another sealing O-ring to seal the threads in the shank of that needle. So I'm going to thread that on ahead of time. And then that is going to thread right into here. And this one too, we are also going to gently turn in till it fully seats. I'm only using 2 fingers to rotate the screwdriver very lightly. I don't want to jam it in there and break anything or deform the tip or the hole, so I'm just going to go in just till I feel it stop right there. And so for this one, it's going to be 1.5 turns out. So 1, 2, 3 half turns out. Do the same for the bottom, but this one's going to be 2 full turns out. So I'm going to go all the way in until I feel it bottom out very gently. So right there. And then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 full turns out, 4 half turns out, which is 2 full turns. So now I've got my carburetor preset. My spring is still there and my choke moves more freely than it used to. You can see your idle ports right there that are going to deliver fuel during the idle time. And those look clean and clear. And so now this bracket can go back on. Alright, back over at the snowblower here. We need to get our carburetor hooked back up to the governor linkage and the fuel line. And so if you take a look at the top of the throttle plate here, we got several holes. If you forgot or didn't take good notes or lost your phone that you took the picture with, oftentimes you can, if you look very closely, you'll notice that one hole in particular is going to have a bunch of dirt or wear around it, and that's usually the hole that your linkage was in then. So you can see how we got one that's not as clean and new looking as the others. So we'll make sure that we get that hooked up first. And then we will get our fuel line on. I'll use my pliers to kind of come in here and push that line on a little bit. And we can line up and start our bolts. That one right next to the muffler is a difficult one to get started, so you gotta take it easy, go slow, and be careful. Make sure it gets started straight. I'm using the Torx extension by hand just to make sure that it's going to go in straight and easy before I put any kind of serious torque on it. And I was able to keep it at a shallow enough angle that I was able to get it in there. And so now it's just going to be a matter of tightening it up. Okay, we got those snug for now. Alright, so we want to make sure that fuel line is fully onto the hose bar, so I'm just going to work that back on just a little bit more. Notice my special hose pliers that don't actually pinch holes through the hoses, so I want to make sure we're doing that. We'll position our clamp, and bring our primer hose up and around to the front, push and twirl. Okay, and we got to put our choke bracket back on. Again, being very careful to make sure that your screws start straight. I have to operate the screwdriver on a slight angle because it's hitting the handlebar here. So I had to use my other hand to hold the screw straight while my screwdriver operates it at a slight angle. I'm just going to gently snug it up for right now, and then I'm going to have to come back and make sure that the screwdriver's got a good hold of the inside of the screw before snugging it up any further. And just hand tight is all we need to go on that. And then we got our choke working. You can see here, this is the loose part. A little tighter than it was, but... Alright, so our carb is on and hooked up. Our primer is hooked up. It would be now time to turn our fuel on. Make sure that this thing can hold fuel. And then we can give it a test fire. Okay, got the exhaust set up, and I refilled the fuel tank with some fresh air gas. So let's go ahead. I'm going to come over here, turn the fuel valve to the on position. Got my throttle in the idle or start position. I'll put the choke on, turn on the exhaust. Got a little bit of harmonics with the exhaust hose too. Hopefully you heard some of that and took note of some of that. Started okay. I might have cracked the choke a little quickly at the beginning there, but it runs pretty decent, and it started nicely on one pull without even having to make any fine-tune adjustments to the idle mixture screw or the main mixture screw or the idle speed screw yet. So the next step would be to go ahead and do the rest of the tune-up, and then as it's running and warming up with some fresh gas in it, we'll go ahead and get it warm, and then once it's warmed up, we'll take it outside and dial in the mixture and idle speed screws on a carburetor to about where they should be. But you can see here the rough presets that the factory supplies are decent enough to get the engine to start and run right off the bat if everything's clean. Alright, so that was a little bit about troubleshooting a piece of seasonal equipment like the snowblower here. When they come in, you can see that it was related to a fuel system issue, which many times it is, but not always. And you kind of saw the process we went as far as testing for spark and determining which way we had to go first, whether it was, ignition system or fuel system or something else. And then you saw kind of how we went through and cleaned out that carburetor, and we'll likely do the tuning in another video. Thanks for watching.